Was this one of the best trade deadlines in Twins history? We'll talk about it here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. Welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is cold, the Twins talk is hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about the Twins making some moves over the last couple of days leading up to Monday's MLB trade deadline. They made one more move on Monday after making a couple of moves heading into the weekend. So when all is said and done, and if you want to count the Tommy Nance move that was made just a couple of weeks ago on July 10th, that wasn't just a claim off waivers or for cash considerations type of guy. It was a prospect, a light prospect that was given up to go and bring in Tommy Nance. But if you want to throw him into the mix, that's 4 different additions that this Minnesota Twins team has made for the rest of this 2026 season, and in some cases for the 2027 season as well. So we'll talk about all of that this evening and then do a quick preview of our upcoming series against the Kansas City Royals as your Minnesota Twins try to make the final push for the postseason over these next 2 months of baseball. They're going to be in a heated race with the Chicago White Sox and the Cleveland Guardians, not only for a potential AL Central title, but also, if they are unable to get that, for a final AL wildcard spot, 2 different ways that they can get into the postseason if they continue to keep up their pace as it goes. But for right now, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Twinkie Town Tavern and remind you we are a member of the Grey Duck Sports Network. You can go ahead and follow us on Twitter and YouTube at Grey Duck Sports. Then on TikTok, we're at grey.duck.sports. There you'll find all of our podcast episodes, clips from every single show, and stories from the Major League Baseball season, from the Minnesota Twins, from the Minnesota Vikings if you're a football fan, and from the NFL at large. Both current day stories and historical stories, as well as what-if moments in Minnesota sports history. All of that can be, again, found on our social media at Grey Duck Sports on Twitter and YouTube, and at grey.duck.sports on TikTok. Well, one more move for the Minnesota Twins that was made today, that being Monday, August 3rd, leading up to it was about the final half hour before the clock struck 5 p.m. Central Time, which was when you have to put your pencils down and have all your trades submitted to the MLB Commissioner's office. And the Twins added Jeff Hoffman of the Toronto Blue Jays, a relief pitcher, to kind of bolster that back end of Minnesota's bullpen. Now, if the name Jeff Hoffman seems familiar, there could be a couple of reasons for that. One, if you're just a Minnesota Twins fan and don't watch any baseball outside of the Minnesota Twins, you might know Jeff Hoffman as a member of the 2023 spring training squad of the Minnesota Twins. He signed a minor league deal with the team. He played, the obligatory 3 or 4 weeks in St. Paul, never got a call up to the majors, and opted out of his contract, and he immediately went and had huge success with both the Philadelphia Phillies and then the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, if you don't remember that spring training stint for the 2023 Minnesota Twins, you may remember him from giving up a game-tying home run while he was trying to close down the World Series in Game 7. He gave up the go-ahead home run to Miguel Vargas, and that is what led the Los Angeles Dodgers to ultimately win Game 7 and prevent the Toronto Blue Jays from winning their first World Series since 1993. So there is a little bit of cursedness that comes with bringing in Jeff Hoffman, but I think we can very confidently put that in the rear view mirror. And if he gets into that same sort of situation again in 2026, well, that means your Minnesota Twins are in the World Series, even if they do end up losing, which would surpass all of our wildest expectations coming into the year. Now, they did give up a little bit of a haul, I would say, probably their biggest haul of prospects out of any of these 4 trades that they made over the course of July. Dason Hill, a pitcher, John Klein, a pitcher, and then an infielder, Demuri Pena. Now, Pena is a contact hitting, no power, some speed, some walking ability, but is going to be a guy that if he ever makes it to the major league level, he's going to be a utility player that hits very, very lightly. A poor man's Luis Ariz, for example, and is not going to bring much at the plate in the way of power. John Klein has had some interesting stuff. He's had some ups and downs as a prospect. He's currently graded out on the Fangraphs prospect reports as a guy that has a 35-plus future value as a major league pitcher, which means if you're going by the scouting grade system, 50 is about league average, and he grades out to be a 35 future major leaguer. So he is not going to be a guy that is going to or is expected to have a ton of success, but I believe he was the number 17 player in the Minnesota Twins system. And then Dason Hill is, if any of these guys you could call the gem of the trade, he would be that guy. The number 7 prospect, maybe number 12, depending on what different prospect ranking you're looking at in the Minnesota Twins system. He's outside of any Baseball America top 100 list, but he is a pitcher that has a lot of promise. And that is one of the things that will give me a little bit of pause when looking at this deal is the fact that you are giving up Dason Hill. And John Klein, fine. Demuri Pena, fine. Dason Hill is the one that is going to hurt a little bit. Now, I think when I examine all factors, I'm still very much a fan of acquiring Jeff Hoffman, even if you do have to give up Dason Hill. But I think there is certainly a world where Dason Hill becomes a number 2 or number 3 starter at the major league level for the Toronto Blue Jays. And we are kind of punching ourselves in the face in disappointment for what could have been. And it just becomes another part of the Minnesota sports curse story. I don't think that is a high probability of happening. I think more often in the projections, he would be, if he does make it to the major league level and is a good player at the major league level that does give us some regrets, it would be probably as a bullpen guy. But then that comes out in the wash for whatever Jeff Hoffman was able to provide for you in 2026, and then also, by the way, for 2027. But he has some really good stuff, and he really struggles to control it. And I'm talking more so than Taj Bradley type of stuff, and more so than Taj Bradley trying to control it. His fastball grades out right now at a 50. So average fastball that projects to be 55, above average. Slider already at Class A is a 60 grade. So it's already one standard deviation above a major league average slider with a 70 potential, which would be one of the best sliders in all of baseball. Curveball already above major league average at 55 with a projection to 60, and then changeup is at 40 right now with the projection to 50. The main issue is that command, which is currently at a 20. That's as low as it goes from on the 20 to 80 scale, and it only projects to being below major league average at a 40. Now, that could all change. I think command is the one that you could see change the most and wouldn't fall in line with most reports if a player can really start to find himself a little bit more and work on his mechanics and go into driveline or go into whatever lab during an offseason and all of a sudden recapture his control and recapture his command. Maybe that happens, and then that is the world where Dason Hill becomes a pretty good starting pitcher at the major league level. I'm talking about what we'd expect from Connor Prelip after he gets through this season and maybe next season. That is the kind of guy, kind of registers around that same sort of pedigree with the exceptional slider. And of course, Dason Hill right now without the injury issues in the past, a decent fastball, a pretty good curve, and a changeup that isn't anything to write home about, but can be a pitch that you use 5 to 10% of the time in any given game. So that is the one thing to keep an eye on for this trade. I don't think we're going to be regretting giving up John Klein or Demir Pena. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think the player that we would potentially regret giving up the most is Dason Hill, and he is the one that you want to look for, especially if the Jeff Hoffman experience doesn't go the way that the Minnesota Twins like. Dason Hill could come up and be a decent Major League pitcher. So just watch him through the Toronto Blue Jays system. The one piece of positive for this that might make that price worth it, and might be the selling point to me thinking the Twins, even if they're giving up a lot, got a pretty good deal here, is that Jeff Hoffman is not only just a rental for the final 2 months of this season, but he is going to be here in 2027 as well. So you have a guy who is either going to be your stopper, your setup guy, or your closer, already locked into the bullpen for this year and then next year as well. You're already giving yourself a very good pitcher in the back end of your bullpen for 2027, which is not something we had coming in to 2026, to say the least. There was no elite arm in the Twins bullpen whatsoever coming into this season, coming out of spring training. And the Jays are not paying anything on his contract this year, but they are paying, I think I saw $3.75 million on Jeff Hoffman's contract for next year. So the Twins are going to be on the hook for about $7.5 million, because he was expected to make or supposed to make around 11 to 12 million, depending on different bonuses that he may or may not hit for the 2027 campaign. And then he becomes a free agent. So the Twins are getting a top of the line reliever for cheap, in terms of contract value, while not having to touch one of their top 100 in all of baseball prospects. I think you will take that 9 out of 10 days. 4 out of 5 dentists would recommend that deal be made for the Minnesota Twins, but there is, again, a world where we end up kicking ourselves for giving up on Dason Hill, where he is a starting pitcher in Game 3 of the ALCS against the New York Yankees someday while with the Toronto Blue Jays. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully, I don't want to wish any ill will towards Dason Hill's career, but I just would like the Twins to come out on the better side of this move when all is said and done. Taking a look at Jeff Hoffman's numbers this year, he got off to a really slow start and was blowing save after save after save, kind of feeling the residual effects, I think, of 2025 Game 7 of the World Series, where he, again, blows the Blue Jays' chance at winning their first World Series in over 30 years. But this year, 6-7 with a 3.94 ERA, 75 strikeouts, and 18 walks in 51 innings. So he is a high strikeout, low walk sort of pitcher, and he's putting up a career best in fielding independent pitching at 2.49. And that is a statistic that projects your future results better than ERA does. ERA is very good at showing you, it's perfect at showing you who you've been as a pitcher this year, how many runs you've given up. It's as nice of a stat as you can get in that way, but it's not always the best at projecting future success or failure. FIP is a little bit better at that, so he is pitching much better on the subconscious level, I guess, or the underneath the hood. He's pitching much better than the 3.94 ERA would lead you to believe. And since June or July, he's only given up, I think, 3 total runs. So most of the runs that he's given up this season came in the first 2 months of the season. Since then, he has really locked it down over the last 2 months as a member of the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, I think a little bit of that was him moving off of the closer's role and not being in as high leverage of situations anymore. And I'm not sure if that is where the Minnesota Twins are going to have him as a closer or not. I'll talk about that in just a second. But again, he has been excellent over the last 2 months, and even looking at the full season numbers, he has some of the best stuff in all of Major League Baseball with excellent slider. That is his best pitch. It is top of the line in all of baseball. He has a very good fastball that goes at about 96 to 97 miles per hour on average, and then a splitter and a sinker that he throws in to the mix as well. But it's going to be mostly fastball, slider, and probably slider more often than he throws a fastball. Right now, his strikeout percentage minus walk percentage is at 26%. 26.5%. And you might be wondering, what is that? Well, I mean, you just take how many strikeouts, or your percent chance of striking out a batter based on your strikeouts to batters faced this season, and then also your chances of walking a batter based on your walks to batters faced so far this season, and you subtract those two percentages, and typically that is also a very good predictor of future results. And when you have a 26.5% K rate minus walk rate, then you're in pretty good company. In fact, this would be the second best in Jeff Hoffman's entire career, which has been pretty good, especially as of late, and his best since 2024, which was his best season as a pitcher when he was a part of the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen. Meanwhile, a career high in whiff rate, so a career high in getting swings and misses at just under 38%, a career high in his stuff plus per MLB Pitch Profiler at 113 overall. 100 is average, 113 is well above average. You're not seeing too many guys get higher than that. In fact, he's in 99th percentile in his stuff this season, and it is a career high for him. So a lot of the under the hood numbers point to Jeff Hoffman, who's already putting up decent numbers this season, being a elite, top of the line, back end of the bullpen sort of player for the rest of 2026, something that the Minnesota Twins desperately needed. And if I am Derek Shelton, I've seen a lot of kind of stuff online saying that Jeff Hoffman should not be the Twins closer, and I push back on that 100%. There is no reason why Jeff Hoffman should not be closing games for the Minnesota Twins, unless you truly want to go for using him in the Andrew Miller role, like the Cleveland, at the time, Indians used during the 2016 postseason, where whatever the highest leverage situation was at any point in the game, they would throw in Andrew Miller as the guy to get those out. So if you want to use him as a stopper, I understand that. But if you are using traditional bullpen roles, then absolutely Jeff Hoffman should be your closer. By far and away, he has the best stuff. I love what Yoendris Gomez has done this year. His stuff is decent. It is not at Jeff Hoffman levels. So Jeff Hoffman, even though, you know, in the back of your mind, you're going to be having some concerns about him blowing up because of what he did at the beginning of the season in the closer role, and especially what he did during the 2025 World Series in Game 7, giving up, again, that game-tying home run that allowed the Dodgers to win their second World Series in a row. But he is far and away the best reliever that you have. He has the best stuff. He has the best peripheral numbers. You need to have him as your closer and or stopper, and he has some experience in that role. All of last season, or most of last season, he was the Blue Jays closer, and he had 33 saves. He split time as a closer for Philadelphia back in 2024, and as a setup guy, they kind of used him in a variety of different roles, and he had 10 saves. Jeff Hoffman needs to be the closer. I do not understand where the opinions of fans that I've seen on Twitter saying, like, I don't want Derek Shelton, or Reddit especially, I don't want Derek Shelton to outthink himself and put Jeff Hoffman at closer. Why not? Like, I think those are the fans whose minds are so poisoned by one singular event in 2025 that they just can't get past that. And I think that is a very elementary way of looking not only at baseball, but just looking at sports in general. I think by and large, you're going to see Jeff Hoffman find success in those high leverage spots way more often than you're going to see results like the 2025 World Series. And again, if he has exactly that same situation happen again, that means the Minnesota Twins are playing for a World Series title for some reason, and have stretched a National League team that is probably on paper much better than them out to 7 games, and I will take that even if it ends in a World Series loss. I will take that because at that point it would just be this team way ahead of schedule and playing with house money, certainly. So let's just quickly look at the deadline rewind for Minnesota. They end up getting 4 different guys if you count Tommy Nance. So let's count Tommy Nance, who was acquired on July 10th. They trade for Nance from the Blue Jays, another reliever, for Ryan Sprock, very low-level prospect. Not much that you're giving up there. Then last Thursday night, they trade for A.J. Minter, a Mets reliever, a lefty, and they give away Billy Amick and Bruin Agbayana, who was the son of Benny Agbayani, who was a kind of Mets folk hero during the 90s and early 2000s. Then they get a starting pitcher in Dean Kramer from the Baltimore Orioles, who's having a down year. They trade Jonardo Reyes, who is an 18-year-old who's hitting well right now during his minor league 2026 campaign, but I'm not exactly sure how all of that projects. It might be a little bit too early to tell with him. And he was in the top 30, but he wasn't a highly touted prospect. And then the big move on Monday, they get Jeff Hoffman again for Dason Hill, John Klein, and Demuri Pena. So that is your Twins deadline. Much more fruitful in terms of the pieces that you're adding that are Major League ready than it was last year for Minnesota. And probably one of the most eventful Twins trade deadlines as buyers that they've had, certainly since 2022. But even if you go back to like 2019, they brought in that domestic abuse pitcher, whose name I forgot, thankfully, and whose name will be lost to history, thankfully. In 2017, they brought in, then gave away Jaime Garcia. They kind of decided, well, maybe we'll be buyers at first, and then they were swept in a series to the Dodgers, and they ended up being sellers instead. And then 2015, they were buyers, but really the only thing they brought in was Kevin Jepsen. You might even go back to 2010, where they bring in Matt Capps and Brian Fuentes, and I think this would kind of be in that sort of range, although even in 2010, you gave up a prospect that I didn't really love giving up. So this is one of the most eventful trade deadlines of the 21st century, if you can believe it, for the Minnesota Twins. And I'm going to give it a B- grade overall. The strengths of this deadline is that the bullpen upgrades are significant. The bullpen, as it currently stood before the trade deadline, I shouldn't say currently stood if I'm talking about before, because that is not current, but the bullpen as it stood before the trade deadline was on life support. And yes, they've had a stronger July, but you were counting on that July projecting throughout the final parts of the season if you don't make any improvements to your bullpen. And I didn't have much faith in that happening. It was untenable to have that bullpen be there for the final 2 months of the season and say that you have a chance at making it into the playoffs. So they have made some significant upgrades. Let's just look at what the bullpen probably will be throughout the rest of the season, barring any injuries, and that would be Jeff Hoffman, AJ Minter, Yoendris Gomez, Andrew Morris, Tommy Nance, Taylor Rogers, Cody Funderburk, and Kendry Rojas or Connor Prelip if he gets pushed down in order to keep him pitching in 2026, because he has a pitching limit, an innings limit, that if he reaches, he has to be shut down, that the team decided before the season because of some injury history. So if you will get to, it'll take longer for you to get to that innings limit if you are being used in the bullpen. So maybe Connor Prelip comes back to the bullpen. And I think this takes it from bottom 3 bullpen in Major League Baseball to middle of the road overall, 15th to 18th. I don't think top 10, but certainly a bullpen that with the Twins offense, and if the starting pitching stays healthy the rest of the year, and we don't have to go into more depth for some of these guys, should be enough to get you into the postseason. And we were also, by the way, apparently, according to one reporter, Michael Marino, we were very close to landing Brian Abreu for Trevor Larnach. And if you had Brian Abreu in the bullpen, then that makes it a top 10 bullpen. But the Houston Astros owner nixed it at the last second, if you believe that report. I'm not exactly sure who Michael Marino is. He doesn't seem to be a reporter. If you search his name on Google online, he only appears on Twitter. So take that with a grain of salt, as if that was actually a rumor or was just something that some random guy with a blue check mark made up completely. So I like what they did with the bullpen, and I would have liked them to do a little bit more with the starting pitching. They do add Dean Kramer, but I wanted them to add one more guy, because right now as it stands, Joe Ryan, great. Taj Bradley, great. Bailey Ober, great. Dean Kramer, okay. And then Connor Prelip, until he reaches his innings limit or is sent to the bullpen. Then Zevi, who was just recently optioned, or Kendry Rojas, who would be my choice for that 5th and final spot in the starting rotation. But if you're dealing with injuries, then you're digging back into AAA or AA to try and bring someone, or going onto the waiver wire to bring in a player. Mike Paredes is injured throughout the rest of the season. Mick Abel probably not going to be back at all this year. So those guys are already out for the year, and you would have to find another team's trash or an unproven option within your minor league system. So that is a little bit scary. And based on some of the packages that were given up over the course of this trade deadline, I think the Twins could have kept, and again, I was willing to give up Manuel Rodriguez because of all the injuries that he's had, even if he is supremely talented and a top 100 prospect in all of baseball. I would have been very, very willing to give him up. I'm not sure if the Twins front office would have felt the same way, but given the packages that went for Kevin Gausman, Robbie Ray, and Luis Castillo, those guys were definitely attainable by the Minnesota Twins had they wanted to add one more starting pitcher. So I'm knocking off some points for not going to get one more starting pitcher, and then also knocking off points because the capital that was given up is greater than the capital that was brought in. So you are definitely giving up more than you got, giving up more in future assets than you got here, which isn't as big of a factor, but is a factor that plays a role. I think typically at the trade deadline, the buyers are going to give up a little bit more than they are bringing in, but it's for that chance to win right now. So I'm fine with that. I think the Twins overpaid a little bit by and large when you look at the whole cumulative amount of players that are going out of the organization and coming in to the organization. So in conclusion for this trade deadline that I'm giving again a B-, the Twins said that they would be buyers, and they certainly were. And again, this has been more so than any year since 2022, and past that, not counting that, probably more so than any other year since 2010. They didn't have to give up any of their top, I would say, untouchable sort of prospects like Walker Jenkins, and for some folks, Emmanuel Rodriguez, Gabriel Gonzalez, even Eduardo Tate didn't have to give up. Henry Mendez didn't have to give up. So they kept the best part of their minor league system, by and large, intact. And they also didn't go all in during a season where it wouldn't have made much sense for them to go all in, because this is not a team. I mean, any team, if you make the playoffs, can make a run to the World Series. We've seen that. We've seen the worst teams in the postseason have magical runs. So I'm not saying that this is not a team that has a chance to go to the World Series, but I think if this team makes the playoffs, they're going to have one of the very, very low-end chances of making it to the World Series. So it's not a team that is in a position to really go all in at this moment. Maybe next year, if this team continues to trend upwards, maybe they are at that point, but they were not at this point this year. This year, I think the pieces that they added, the buying that they made, that they did at this trade deadline, was fair to the team that they were. I think they did what they should have done without going too far into the deep weeds. And they got a couple of bullpen guys locked down for 2027 with Jeff Hoffman, and I believe Tommy Nance is also in his arbitration years, so he is locked down if the Twins want to bring him back. And you've got two bullpen guys locked, loaded, ready to go, along with like Yoendris Gomez and Andrew Morris, if those guys continue to be solid bullpen options. And really, at the beginning of the season on this podcast, I said our goal, or at least my goal, was to avoid a major sell-off at the deadline and to be somewhat in playoff position once the deadline came around. The Twins avoided a major sell-off. They didn't sell any parts. Ryan Jeffers is still here. Trevor Larnach is still here. Joe Ryan is still here. All of the players that I think we thought, we worried wouldn't be on the team at the end of the 2026 season are all still members of the 2026 Minnesota Twins and will be on this roster throughout the rest of the year. So that goal has been achieved, and it has led us to this new goal of get into the postseason and give fans some playoff baseball. And I think the moves that were made give the Twins a good opportunity to do that. It's not a certainty, but it gives them an even better chance by improving their bullpen, because I think if you go with a top 10 offense, a middle-of-the-road starting rotation, a middle-of-the-road bullpen, that is enough to get into the playoffs when 12 of 30 major league teams make it into the postseason. Let's just look quickly at some of the AL Central moves that were made. The Tigers and Royals, significant sellers. You might have heard the Tigers gave up their ace, Tarek Skubal. They also gave up Casey Mize. The Royals give up Chris Bubich. The Royals give up Lane Thomas, some other more short-term contract sort of guys. They're not getting away too many of their big hitters, but Tarek Skubal leaving the division certainly is the biggest headline there for the Tigers and Royals. They are both probably going to start to fade into oblivion. The Royals already were in oblivion entering the trade deadline, so they will fade even further into it. But the White Sox and Cleveland Guardians did some good, strong moves, aggressive moves at the trade deadline to be solid buyers. The White Sox bring in a backup catcher in Joey Bart. They bring in Brenton Doyle, who has had decent seasons as a center fielder. His first 2 years, he won a Gold Glove, but he's only had one season with an OPS plus of over 100, and that was at 102. So he was just barely above a league average hitter, and that was back in the 2024 campaign. He has not been a league average hitter even since then, and in the last 2 years, his defense has gotten worse if you look at the metrics from Baseball Savant. So he's not that Gold Glove center fielder that he was during the first 2 years of his career. Luis Castillo, a guy that I wanted the Minnesota Twins to look at, he ends up going to the Chicago White Sox. I like that move for them, but again, you're hoping, and I was hoping if he had come to the Minnesota Twins, that the rest of the season results would be looking a lot more like what they had in the 2024, 2025, 2023 seasons, rather than what Luis Castillo had showed up to this point in 2026, because this has been the worst season of his career results-wise and like ERA-wise. And if he continues to be on that track, then it's not a great move. But if he continues and projects to the way I thought he would if the Twins had gone after to get him, then it certainly gives you a very good veteran arm in your starting rotation as the Chicago White Sox. And then Huascar Brazoban they got from the New York Mets. That's a solid bullpen arm, but they also had to part ways with Sir Anthony Dominguez, who I would say is a better bullpen arm, in order for them to get Luis Castillo. Sir Anthony Dominguez was part of that Luis Castillo trade. So I think that kind of those wash out, and really the only big gain that you've brought in is Luis Castillo, unless you think you can fix something with Brenton Doyle's defense and offense. Then the Cleveland Guardians, they had a pretty good deadline. Joe Adell, who has been an up and down hitter, and has done some good things defensively. He romped 3 home runs in one game earlier this year, but at the plate this year, he's been pretty poor. 239, 287, 395. It's a 93 OPS plus. He has 16 home runs and 62 runs batted in. But again, that could be a guy like they had with like Franmil Reyes, except with a better glove. Franmil Reyes was in that similar mold of not always being at the top of his game offensively, but having the ability to be a dangerous hitter when he was at the top of his game. If Joe Adell is a dangerous hitter for 2 months, he can have a Franmil Reyes type of renaissance and provide some pop for a Cleveland Guardians team that does not have a lot of offense. And then a guy that should, no matter what, provide some pop, even if he's playing at his baseline so far through 2026, is Nathaniel Lowe. They bring him in. He's hitting 266, 341, and 480. That's a 122 OPS plus, 12 home runs, 37 runs batted in. They also bring in Foster Griffin, who is a very good pitcher for the Washington Nationals. He spent some years overseas in Japan. After beginning his professional baseball career in the majors back in the late 2010s. He spends 3 years out in Japan refining his stuff, and we've seen a couple of pitchers do that and come back and find success, and Foster Griffin is another example of that. He makes the All-Star game with the Washington Nationals earlier in July, I should say, and goes 12-3 so far this season with a 3.06 ERA, 116 strikeouts, 30 walks, and a 4.09 FIP. So maybe his production, his current results are outproducing what his under-the-hood numbers would show him as in terms of his complete ability. He might be outproducing that so far. Maybe he falls back down to that 4.09 FIP. area with his ERA for the final 2 months of the season, but even if that is the case, then he is still a good pitcher for this Cleveland Guardians rotation to have, a Cleveland Guardians rotation that already just continues to generate great starting pitchers every single year, it seems. Craig Yoho, decent reliever. Blake Perkins, depth outfielder, who has had a terrible time hitting this season. Overall, a strong deadline for the Cleveland Guardians. So if I was ranking the 3 teams that are in playoff contention in the AL Central the rest of the way, I would say the Cleveland Guardians number 1, the Minnesota Twins number 2, and the Chicago White Sox number 3. So I think that still puts us in a chance to be in the playoffs. And that's also me thinking that Joe Adell is going to have a resurgence during the final 2 months and is going to hit much better than he had through the first 4 months of the season with the Angels. But I think that all of these teams made moves to solidify their roster and that it is going to be a battle all the way throughout the final 2 months of the season. And these teams are just separated by slight margins in terms of those rankings of moves from the 2026 deadline that I just put forth for them there. All right, that is the MLB trade deadline. One of the most fun times of the year is now in the back mirror, and it's just pure baseball the rest of the way. It starts on Tuesday with a series against the Kansas City Royals. 3 games, all in Kansas City, all of them starting at 6:40 p.m. Central Time before they begin a weekend series against the Milwaukee Brewers, which should be a tough one. But for this series against Kansas City, Minnesota sends Joe Ryan to the mound against Randy Dobnak on Tuesday. Then Dean Kramer makes his Twins debut for Minnesota on Wednesday against Noah Cameron, who has straight up dominated the Twins so far this season. And Bailey Ober will close out the series against Michael Wacha on Thursday. That is what you have to look forward to for the rest of the season. We will be back, or for the rest of this week, we will be back after each of those games to recap what happened in them, and hopefully it is a clean Twins sweep over a Kansas City Royals team that now has started to, again, fade into very much oblivion. And that's the last call on Twins Talk for tonight. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining in on the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after the next one. Go Twins!